Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Billy points out, not only will the Prime Minister let this go, she'll welcome Donald Trump to Buckingham Palace later this year. You have to start acknowledging or explaining why this stuff doesn't bother you, why this mounting evidence of Britain's increasing desperation is worrisome. But we'll move on now. We'll bring events, well, I was going to say closer to home, but libelling the British Prime Minister. I can't find any other evidence of this apology apart from the Telegraph report. The deputy political editor of the Telegraph has good security contacts and writes less than half an hour ago that intelligence sources had told him there have been 2 apologies to the British government, to GCHQ. But it doesn't matter, does it? This is the penny drop moment for us, for you and me at least. The penny drop moment is it doesn't matter because it's out there now. And the websites will report it as if it's always been true. Yeah, it was GCHQ that did the wiretapping. That's why the CIA couldn't prove it. Everything's back to normal. And the budget, which is going to screw poor people on a scale that hasn't been seen since the Depression in America, the proposed budget, it won't all get through, but it doesn't have to, does it? Oh, man alive. Now, British politics seems almost quaint in comparison, doesn't it, to the madness that's unfolding on the other side of the pond. The SNP deputy leader, as you just heard in the news, has said that there is no doubt a second referendum on Scottish independence will take place. Theresa May has insisted that now is not the time. I derive now, in the current political climate, absolutely zero pleasure from getting things right. Because usually when I get things right, it's with a very pessimistic tone. And then when it turns out I was right, I wish I wasn't right. Even on the morning of the Dutch election, I woke up almost reluctant to look at the polls, to look at the results, even though the exit polls appeared to suggest that Geert Wilders, an out-and-out xenophobe, an unapologetic Islamophobe, had failed to become the biggest leader in the country. It's by no means evidence that the tide is turning or that kind of attitude is in abeyance. Please believe me on that. But I did say to you that there's no way Theresa May is going to give a referendum to Nicola Sturgeon. It wasn't a particularly sparkling observation or a particularly clever one, but it was, for me, a pretty cast iron one on the very simple grounds that if it happened and she lost, she'd probably have to resign. And if it was on the agenda at all as they went into Brussels to conduct negotiations to withdraw from the European Union, they would do so without being able to tell their negotiating counterparts what the United Kingdom actually was. It's incredible, isn't it? You couldn't actually tell the people you were negotiating with about what the departure was going to look like, what the United Kingdom would be after departure if you had this referendum hanging over you. In many ways, you still can't, but at least it's on the back burner. 6 years, some say. Angus Robertson seems to think it would be sooner. A lot of new listeners piling in north of the border. I don't want this conversation to be confined to them because Scottish independence is relevant to all of us. Of course it is. I want you to give me your half-time analysis of this match between Theresa May and Nicola Sturgeon. I want you to give me a call now, straight up. Just give me your half-time analysis. Okay, 0345 606 0973. If you're Scottish, you can be Alan Hansen. If you're not Scottish, you can be Mark Lawrenson. All right, 0345 606 0973. I know the cast-on match of the day has changed, but hey, indulge my 45 years a little, will you? So that's all I want. So how's it playing for you up in Scotland? 0345 606 0973. How's it playing for you down in England? 0345 606 0973. I'll be Gary Lineker, all right? One of my fellow snowflakes. Also, I joined him today in the lofty company of being turned over by the Daily Mail, so nowhere near this sort of level of criticism and abuse that Gary Lineker and Lily Allen have endured, but still, in my own small way, baby steps. Any day now, enemy of the people, yes. So here's the thing. Nicola Sturgeon's played an absolute blinder, but Theresa May couldn't have played her hands any differently, could she? What else could she have done? The gift of the referendum lies with her. It cannot be put to Westminster unless she says so. Nicola Sturgeon knew this. So when it appeared that Nicola Sturgeon had gone temporarily loony, when she said that she wanted the referendum before Brexit had actually happened, that was the only point at which I kind of got a bit confused. Why would you want to have the referendum before you know what Brexit is? Surely this sort of faint possibility that we might still be able to negotiate something that it leaves us better off or the same or not materially worse off than we are now. Surely you wait for that ship to come in before you decide whether or not you want to get on it. No? Seemed pretty obvious to me. And then I kind of think it clicked. There's a tweet yesterday from a I've forgotten, I'm afraid, whether he was a member of the Scottish Parliament or a SNP member of the Westminster Parliament. And what he did, I think his name was Callum, what he did, I retweeted it from my account, so you can find it yourself if you've got the time. What he did was point out, how would you feel if you're sort of still a passionate Leaver who's screaming at the radio at the moment, how would you feel if Brussels had told us we couldn't have a referendum? Yeah? How would you feel? How would you feel if David Cameron had said, I'm going to stand by my manifesto pledge, we are going to have a referendum, but under this slightly arcane and previously unnoticed item of constitutional law, Brussels actually do control us, it turns out, and we're not allowed to have a referendum. See, the one bit I never got was this idea that we don't make our own laws, because we do, demonstrably. And yet once that seed is sown, it grows into a really powerful plant, doesn't it? And this is not to criticise anybody, actually. This is to understand. If I believed that British laws were being made somewhere else, I'd be on the completely on that side. It's outrageous. We should be able to make our own laws. I think we are able to make our own laws. I might be wrong. It might well be that there's loads of laws I wasn't aware of that we should have had and don't have, and loads of laws we shouldn't have that we won't have once everything is done and dusted. But generally speaking, that emotional sense that we're not in control of our own destiny, that's where nativism and patriotism collide, isn't it? So what Nicola Sturgeon has done is effectively provide the Scottish Nationals with the most powerful propaganda imaginable, which is on ice until the referendum actually happens. Because when the referendum actually happens, they can say, how would you have felt if Brussels didn't let you? When they didn't let us have that referendum back in 2018, when Theresa May denied the Scottish people the fundamental principle of autonomy, that was as if Brussels had turned around and told Britain that they couldn't have a referendum on EU membership. Now, I don't know whether the detail of that observation stands up to scrutiny or whether or not you agree with it. But I think it at first glance, it's pretty powerful, no? So, half-time, what's the score? Is it a score draw? Or has Nicola Sturgeon slipped one past Theresa May? 0345 6060973. The football analogy works, actually, if you've seen the clip of Ruth Davidson, the leader of the Scottish Tories, on Twitter. Absolutely nailing a penalty right into the bottom right-hand corner, but I digress slightly. Look, I'm not going to lie to you. I don't want my country to break up. I really don't. But I don't think I have the right, as someone who lives in England, to kind of lord it over Scots. I think we share our thoughts, we share our hopes, we share our desires, but that line there, how would you feel if Brussels... I think even people who are quite worried about the European Union departure would have been outraged. Once that referendum was on the table, they would have been outraged if Brussels had turned around. If Brussels really did possess all the power and all the clout that some people say it does, if they really had turned around and told us we couldn't have a referendum, I'd have been absolutely furious. I'd have been spitting nails. That would have been an affront to our most basic democratic principles. And I'm not comparing oranges with oranges, but I am comparing an orange with a spun orange. And when it's been spun, that's how it's going to play in Scotland. They wouldn't let us have a referendum. How would they have felt if Britain hadn't been allowed to have one on membership of the European Union? So, Theresa May had her hands tied behind her back, I think, while Nicola Sturgeon came up to take this penalty. But she still sort of managed... Well, she still dived. Did she actually stop the ball? 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Who's winning? Who's winning on this? And what do you think? And you may need to have a Scottish perspective on it to answer this question. What do you think has happened? I don't really care about the opinion polls at the moment because they're going to be too fresh. What do you think has happened in the last week to the long-term prospect, i.e. within a decade, of Scottish independence, of another referendum and a different result from the last time? I'm just reading tea leaves on this one, but I think that little observation there about the parallel with Brussels, and factor into that kind of what that feeds, even in rational people. That feeds a sense that we're not actually in control of our own destiny. And that, as we know, is an incredibly powerful political tool. 0345 6060 973. You can email james@lbc.co.uk. You can text 84850. Or you can tweet at Mr. James OB. It's half-time, really, in the battle between Theresa May and Nicola Sturgeon. They could both be substituted and replaced with someone else before the... No, I'm not going to wind in this football analogy. I'm loving it. They could both be substituted and someone else comes in off the bench before the full-time whistle actually goes. Probably, if it's 6 years before we have a referendum, it won't be both of them duking it out. But who's got the upper hand right now? Half-time analysis. Stuart's in Paisley. Stuart, what do you think?
I personally, while I'm not a natural Braveheart spouting nationalist, I think Nicola Sturgeon is ahead. In terms of, I suppose, a better narrative that she's putting across. When Brexit was announced, the SNP put forward a 60-page document, white paper, should be part of the European single market. And it's been dismissed, and every other concern that has came from Scotland has been just dismissed, completely out of hand.
And that's a really powerful tool for her, regardless of, how much weight it has, detail and evidence. They could make arguments for saying, no, we just haven't got around to it yet, or we're not dismissing it, we're just prioritising. But that once that takes hold in Scotland, that sense that their concerns, their Brexit concerns have been treated with contempt, the independence cause is boosted.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I personally was not a natural independence person. I voted to remain originally, but also voted to remain in the EU. However, the narrative up here has changed heavily because 62% of us obviously wanted to remain in the European Union. I think a majority of people don't want the UK to break up, but I think that people feel they've been forced into a corner where there is no other alternative. We want to have a say in how
there's the other. I'm sorry to butt in. There's the other constituency as well. We discovered this when we tackled Scottish politics earlier in the week. There's a significant constituency of people that want both. They want to be independent of the United Kingdom and they want to be out of the European Union as well. We have to acknowledge their existence.
Yeah, and I mean, personally speaking, I was reading quite a lot of forums, and somebody pointed out that modelling it along Norway, where part of the single market in the EEA, as opposed to a member of the EU, would probably appeal to all those sides moving forward. But even that option is dismissed as a UK-wide part. And personally, I think the suicidal headlong rush to go to Brexit, which is the narrative being driven by, I don't mean to say this very patronisingly, but a very typical Little Englander view where it's very narrow-minded and so forth. And I'm not saying that because I have plenty of English friends. So.
Of course, and I'm late for the travel, perennially. Where's your dial then now, your needle? So if we go from 0 to 100 on independence, prior to, this week or last week, you were on about, 30 or 40%? Because you weren't... Where are you now?
I would probably say between 55 to 60.
Whoa! And that's the point. And that's why I suspect that this half-time analysis... Thank you, Alan. It's not Alan. It's Stuart in Paisley. I'm going to call him Alan because I'm hilarious. I suspect that the conclusion will be that Nicola Sturgeon has indeed slipped one past the diving Theresa May. It's 11:16. I mean, this is going to probably set off a lot more fireworks in my world than it is in yours. By that, I just mean people who work in the media. But the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, has just been appointed editor of the London Evening Standard, a newspaper owned, of course, by the Russian billionaire Yevgeny Lebedev. You heard me correctly. George Osborne, I don't know whether he will continue to be an MP. Early indications are that he will be, at least in the short term. He's going to become editor of the London Evening Standard in May. And he's also isn't he doing 1 day a week's work or 1 day a month's work for an asset management company in return for about £650,000 a year? I tell you what, we've really stuck it to those elites, haven't we, as a country? We've really nailed it. That was really good work, Britain. We've really sort of, really acted in the interest of ordinary people. I could now cast aspersions on George Osborne's qualifications to be editor of the London Evening Standard, but in his defence, he did actually apply for the graduate traineeship at the Times before he went to work for the Conservative Party. He got turned down, but at least he applied to be a journalist in his early 20s. Now he's editor of the London Evening Standard. Good grief. 22 after 11. I never know with media stories whether or not you want to talk about them or not. I don't know whether you're as interested in this sort of stuff as I am. Obviously, I have a professional interest in this. My background is in newspapers, and I find it slightly unnerving because the former editor of the London Evening Standard, which under her editorship, it was a good paper, but it was a fanzine for Boris Johnson before he was replaced by Sadiq Khan. Very much a fanzine. Even more than some shows on this radio station were. She's gone off to edit the Today programme on Radio 4. So she moves across to edit the Today programme on Radio 4. And George Osborne, I would have gone for April Fool on that. I'm not going to lie to you. If it wasn't, St. Patrick's Day, so the date is kind of burnt in my consciousness, I'd have checked the date on this. I really would. George Osborne is going to edit the London Evening Standard. Right. I've got some calls waiting on Scotland, but I'll be honest with you, I've got plenty of room for more. So on this one, you tell me how interested you are in George Osborne being appointed editor of the London Evening Standard. And if you want to talk about it, just ring me now. Otherwise, I want more calls on Scotland as well. Who's winning this? Is it a battle of wits or a battle of wills? Or a little bit of both? Between Nicola Sturgeon and Theresa May. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Nicola Sturgeon is currently 1-0 up. How do you respond to the news that the ex-Chancellor George Osborne has been given one of the best jobs in British journalism by the billionaire Russian owner at a time when the political moves in this country were supposed to be away from elites, and he's already getting, 650 grand from her? I'm going to have to give up and go home soon. Every time a story breaks, it just adds to the sense that everything is changing. I happen to think for the worse. You're perfectly entitled to think for the better. Let's go to Marissa in Mill Hill. Sturgeon or May, Marissa?
Hi. Well, my argument here is that, what you said was correct, that it would be disgusting if we cannot vote, if the European Union stopped us from voting and didn't give us our rights. Okay. That's fine. However, my argument here is that European Union didn't have any changes at the time. We had there was nothing that we could stop us from voting or change our mind, right? With Scottish people, with Scottish referendum, Scottish people have the right to be in a position to see what will happen after the Brexit. What's happening at the moment, they would not have this opportunity. Are they going to have a third referendum? I don't think so. So should they have the referendum now and the vote to leave United Kingdom, and the Brexit will go ahead without Scotland, then it's...
No, but that was never on the cards. It would be the negotiations would be taking place at the same time as the referendum. I suppose the result might have come in and changed the negotiations. That's why I couldn't really see two things: A, how Theresa May could possibly agree to it, or B, and this is where it becomes tactical, I think, Marissa. This is where my suspicion is that Nicola Sturgeon has played a very, very cagey game. She didn't want it. She didn't want it either, but she just wanted it out there that they'd been told they couldn't have one, because then when the time comes when they can have one, they can say, look what you did to us.
Exactly. She wants out, and she wants this referendum to happen now. I think it's a strategical game, but a good strategy would be to let Scottish people to wait and see what will happen after the Brexit.
Yeah, well, of course, but the point is that the fox is out of the traps. The dog is on the run, and that dog is. Well, how would you have felt if you weren't allowed to have a vote on membership of the European Union? Look, it doesn't stand up to very detailed scrutiny. The two instances, the two entities are very, very different things, and the two constitutions are profoundly different. The nature of Scotland's relationship with the United Kingdom is very different from the United Kingdom's relationship with the European Union. But we're not living in an age of detailed scrutiny. We're living in an age of headlines and sound bites. And George Osborne being editor of the Evening Standard. Give me a ring about that. Go on, I want to talk to someone about it. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Donna's in Reading. It's 2-0 to Sturgeon. Donna, are you going to put in a shout for the British Prime Minister?
Unfortunately not. I do think that Nicola has probably put one over on Mrs May on this occasion.
How come?
I just think that I think during the whole EU referendum, the thing that really got me was everyone saying, "Oh, we want our country back."
Yes.
What a sovereign nation, and which I found quite ridiculous, because I knew first time around that Scotland had to ask for a referendum, and if Britain wasn't independent, then they could never have had a referendum for the EU without asking. So I always found that argument quite ridiculous.
Yes, and I mean, I hesitate to do this, but I pulled it out of the bag earlier in the week. The parallel is with Syria and Iraq, perhaps. So all the reasons why we went into Iraq that turned out not to be true were true with regard to Syria, but our appetite for doing it had disappeared. All the arguments about sovereignty and lack of control that we heard during the referendum campaign that aren't really true. The idea that we can't make our own laws, that our parliament wasn't sovereign. Even the white paper said our parliament has always been sovereign.
Yeah.
They actually do apply to Scotland.
Yeah, and the hypocrisy of the Brexiteers now as well is quite staggering.
Be careful what you say, Donna. You might end up getting turned over on page 47 of tomorrow's Daily Mail if you say stuff like that.
Oh, they can put me on the front page if they like. I couldn't care less. I'd wear it as a badge of honour.
Well, we'll see. 11:28 is the time. 3-0 then to Nicola Sturgeon. Robin's in Kettering. Robin, what would you like to say?
Yeah, you might shoot me down on this, James, but
never, Robin.
My point is that your football match analogy. As an Englishman living in England, I'm not even playing the game. The game doesn't. I'm not represented in the game. And but
it's between Theresa May and Nicola Sturgeon. Theresa May wants the union to stay together. Nicola Sturgeon doesn't.
Yes, but to go to my point is yes, give them a referendum. Give the whole country the referendum. Let the whole UK vote whether Scotland can leave or not. Because if they do vote to leave, again, I think I'm correct in saying this, that only that 10% of the UK would be able to split the UK.
Yes, but how would you feel about the 27? If we're 27 remaining EU countries, should they have a power of veto on Brexit?
No, they shouldn't.
Why not?
No,
it's a tiny percentage of the European Union has the power to split the European Union.
Well, we chose to join the EU. So
Scotland chose to join the Union when James VI became James I.
I doubt if all. I think that would be the hierarchy of Scotland chose to do it. They didn't have a referendum to join.
Well, most of the world couldn't write, so it would have been a fascinating referendum. But that's not really the point, is it? Your argument is that because it's such a big fracture, being affected by such a small constituency of the whole entity, that the rest of the union should have some sort of say in it. And I'm just pointing out. I'm being the devil's advocate, Robin, but I'm just pointing out that if the other 27 EU countries had a veto, you'd be horrified.
Well, yes.
And that's the Scottish argument, without you realising it. You've just, in a nutshell, you've explained how the Scots feel. Because the outrage you would feel if the other 27 EU countries had a veto on Brexit, that's how Scots feel the English establishment is to them. The job of people who care about this country is to convince them that that's not how the English establishment feels. But if you're looking for evidence that the English establishment isn't a deep-rooted phenomenon and entity, you should probably ignore the news that they've just made George Osborne, son of a Viscount, editor of the Evening Standard, with a journalistic experience that makes me look like Walter Winchell. It's 11:30. Now, just let me very briefly paint a picture before we talk to the doyen of media commentators about the latest shocking developments on what used to be known as Fleet Street. Let's imagine, for the sake of argument, far be it from me to express anything that remotely resembles a political opinion, let us imagine, for the sake of argument, that some of the so-called austerity policies brought in by George Osborne are having and will have a profoundly deleterious effect upon the lives of Londoners. Maybe the homeless bodies over which one steps today on a scale I can't remember seeing since I came here to go to college in the early 90s are linked in some way to the economic policies of the last Chancellor of the Exchequer. Maybe things like homelessness and child poverty and food banks. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there. Maybe they are linked to the policies introduced by the last Chancellor. What do you think the odds are of those issues being properly covered in a newspaper edited by the last Chancellor? Because that's what we've just got. It's 11:36. Roy Greenslade is the Guardian's media commentator, former editor of the Daily Mirror. What do you reckon, Roy?
Well, it's the most extraordinary appointment. I've seen editors come from what we might call left field in the past, but this is left of left field, or should I say, more properly, as you pointed out politically, right field in this case. It is an amazing appointment, confirming that Yevgeny Lebedev, the owner of the Standard, is an extraordinary man. It is a big punt And I think also that we must question the ethics of a sitting MP being an editor. That's for Parliament to decide about whether or not he should do both jobs. But in purely journalistic terms, it is really amazing. He did, I think, way back in the past, wrote for the Daily Telegraph's Peterborough Diary.
No, we all did. We've all done that, Roy.
Exactly. It's hardly what we'd call the great grooming gown to be an editor. And I think to appoint an obvious high conservative, I think we can call him that, editor of a paper in a city which is a Labour administration is also, I think, politically naive.
Politically naive. I'm 80% certain, because he's my sort of generation, that he got turned down for the Times graduate traineeship as well, Roy. So I don't know whether that mitigates the shifts that he occasionally did. He occasionally did on Peterborough. It's political affiliations of an editor are nothing new, but the idea that he can do it while still an MP. I mean, I presumed that was just a holding tactic, but the intention is to carry on as MP for Tatton, which suggests his political ambitions have not yet fully disappeared, while editing a daily newspaper.
But doesn't it show, once again, and it's going to make people are already pretty cynical about politics, that if you can be an editor, and that takes a lot of hours of your day.
Yes.
If you can be an editor and an MP, I mean, what the hell are MPs doing to earn their money? It's not a full-time job, clearly, and people are going to be, once again, saying to themselves, politicians are all in it for themselves, they don't really do any real work, and it will enhance what I think is already a big trend towards anti-politics.
Anti-politics and the kind of continuing portrayal of whatever the elite actually means. Stories like this that put flesh on the bones of the words and the theory. Do we know? And forgive me for putting you on the spot. Do we know whether he's going to continue with that very lucrative little number with the fund manager as well?
Well, there's the Black Rock thing,
yes,
which he's highly paid for. There's all the speaking engagements, which he's even highly paid for. I think we don't know yet. But surely that would be hugely compromising if he were to continue. I think it's pretty compromising enough. If I was Sadiq Khan right now, I'd be asking deep questions about whether or not he's going to get a fair crack of the whip in this newspaper. He's had reason to complain in the past, but now I would have thought it's rather obvious that he will have cause to believe that the paper is set against him.
Finally, Roy Greenslade, what's in it for Lebedev? I mean, famously, of course, that photograph of Nigel Farage with Rupert Murdoch was taken at Lebedev's summer party, thanks to the covert ministrations of Lily Allen. So he clearly enjoys mixing it up at one end of the political spectrum. What's in it? What can you see here? What he's playing at? What's in it for him?
Well, I don't know if he thinks that this will raise the profile of the Standard. It might raise it, but not necessarily in a very clever way. He does move and groove, Lebedev, in political circles. The last time I saw him out, he was sitting with a prominent Lib Dem minister at the time during the coalition one evening. It seemed very close to him. He likes mixing with celebrities and so on, but this... I just feel this has got, about it, a feeling that he's got the wrong end of the stick. It's really, I think, a huge error. We've never had a situation in which a sitting MP has been an editor. I do remember that Bill Deeds famously stopped being a minister and MP and then went off to edit the Telegraph. Of course, we've had Boris being a columnist, and that's not so unusual.
Well, hang on. What about Boris at the Spectator? What about Boris at the Spectator? There was a bit of a crossover there, wasn't there?
There was, and people thought that was extraordinary too. But this is a daily newspaper in Britain's major city. And I think we could call it, I think it's fair to say, it's an opinion-forming newspaper.
Yes.
It has campaigned, by the way, you might remember, James, since you mentioned it at the beginning.
Yes.
This has campaigned on behalf of the homeless and the dispossessed.
Exactly.
It's campaigned to try and help stop gang warfare and to help gangs. Brilliant work by David Cohen, its reporter. Is he going to continue with this in the sure knowledge that many of his policies bring about the causes of dispossession? I mean, it is, I'll say it again, extraordinary.
It is, and I know I promised I had finished, but just remind us the MP for Tatton and the perception of vested interests and I won't say sleaze, but there's a bit of history there as well, isn't there?
There is, but I think we're going to have to draw a veil over that.
Of a previous incumbent of the Tatton constituency who was perceived to be a little bit too close to very wealthy foreign businessmen and went by the name of Neil Hamilton.
I totally forgot he was the Tatton MC. So now I've entered into that's interesting. You were too oblique for me, and I was too quick to remember something about George Osborne.
Roy Greenslade. Exactly. It shows how complicated things are becoming. Roy Greenslade, whose work you can read in The Guardian, and who was a legendary editor of the Daily Mirror. 11:42 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What do you think about that? Because look, you can tell. I love speaking to an old journalist about this kind of thing, and I could talk about it all day, and it seems fascinating to me. Does it bother you? Does it bother you? He's very much in the mould of the old-fashioned 19th century philanthropist Eugenie Lebedev. It was under his ownership of the Standard that David Cohen did all that great work with the homeless and with gangs and with child poverty in particular. So you can't paint him as two-dimensional, as a sort of binary political loyalist. But, come on. Former Chancellor of the Exchequer, editing the only real kind of big newspaper in a city at the front line of response to cuts that he introduced. I just find this very strange. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about Scotland as well. Has Nicola Sturgeon done Theresa May up like a kipper? Irene is in, Wemyss Bay, up in Scotland. What would you like to say, Irene?
It's Wemyss Bay, James.
Wemyss Bay.
Good morning to you, yeah. She has indeed. Nicola Sturgeon is a very measured, very smart politician. What she has actually done, she has requested or sort of stated that she's going to make the request for the referendum. But it's not today, as everybody is shouting. It's actually the timescale that is mentioned is the end of 2018 to spring of 2019, by which time the Brexit negotiations should be well underway.
No, they won't.
There should be a fair idea of what's actually happening.
Well, I mean, you're right. I apologise if I didn't make that clear. But that's the date that Theresa May has said you can't have one on. You're going to have to wait until it's all done and dusted.
The thing is, though, I don't think that Theresa May has taken into account just how thrawn the Scottish people can be. I mean, if you want a Scot to do something,
yes,
tell them not to do it.
Yeah, but that's the thing, isn't it?
Can't do it.
That's the thing. And I found that tweet from yesterday. I need to dig it out. But the line about imagine, because it doesn't actually stand up to detailed scrutiny. But here it is, by Callum McCraig. Just imagine Brussels had told the UK that they are not allowed to have a referendum. That's the difference between Scotland's two unions. I don't think that stands up to forensic scrutiny, but slogans are not forensic scrutiny. That's weapons grade propaganda, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of propaganda being actually used in this. When it comes to sort of even the mention of a second independence referendum, that old nut keeps coming out. Oh, the pledge that it was once in a lifetime. There was no pledge. There was an opinion was stated in an interview with Alex Salmond. He was being interviewed, and he said, in my opinion, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. At no point in time has either Nicola Sturgeon or Alex Salmond, now being a bit of a political geek as I now have since the referendum, I have sort of really, really looked into it.
And Brexit changes everything anyway. The idea, even if it was once in a lifetime, it's a different lifetime now. So I sense you're all for getting out.
What, of the UK?
Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever gave you that impression?
I don't know. I'm just sort of reading the tea leaves. I don't want you to. What do English people do to persuade Scottish people not to leave? Genuine question. I'm late for the travel.
It's got nothing to do with English people.
It has.
No, it hasn't.
But we're married.
Absolutely.
It's like saying a divorce has got nothing to do with the groom.
But yeah, listen, we're quite happy for English people to come up here and stay with us.
I don't want to come in for a dirty weekend. I want to stay married.
You can come up here and get married.
I see.
We've actually got a very, very healthy English population and European population
I know, but I feel like oddly and increasingly unfashionably, if I were to describe whatever my patriotism looks like, it would involve the whole of the United Kingdom. It really would. I'd even add especially Scotland after England, but I won't. Irene, thank you ever so much. It's 11:46. 650 grand for 1 day a week, is it? Or 1 day? I don't know if he's going to carry on with that. I don't know how much he'll be getting at the Standard. Probably another couple of $100 grand a year. Then he's got all the speaking engagements. Now, look, call me Mildred. I thought that at least if you were going to move from politics into commerce or media or the non-political sphere, and you were going to sort of trade in your political service, I just presumed that the most glittering prizes were reserved for people whose political service had been exemplary or exceptional. You preside over. Incredibly, I mean, first of all, he presided over the referendum, although to be fair to George Osborne, he was one of the few voices close to David Cameron who didn't think he should have called it in the first place. But you've presided over a failed administration. You've been responsible for bringing in a swathe of cuts that still haven't stopped hurting this country. Your management of the economy has been derided by your own party since you left the office. Manifesto pledges are briefly broken by your successor. And you get handed the glittering prizes. This is the bit I don't get. And this is the bit that makes me think that the 0.0001% or whatever they are actually do exist. How do you get a gig like that when you've never written an op-ed in your life? You've never been to an editorial conference? I don't know. Anyway, back to Scotland. It's about 17-0 to Nicola Sturgeon at the moment, and I have to tell you that there's one element of it that we've missed as well. Irene touched upon it. If Theresa May has effectively said we won't know what the terms of Brexit are by 2019, she's kind of admitting that her own timetable is a little bit bogus. At least she seems to be. I could be wrong. Callum is in Tottenham. Callum, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning, Mildred. Actually, I agree with you, but I just couldn't resist it.
Do you know, for a minute I wondered what the hell you were talking about then. I don't listen to myself as closely as you do.
I would like to talk about Nicola Sturgeon, but if I just may say, one wonders what services may have been rendered before or might be expected to be rendered to justify such an appointment.
You can wonder that, and we'll leave it there.
Yes.
Okay.
Having said that, I think Nicola Sturgeon really planted a major bomb in Theresa's playground. So he is a very, very smooth and smart operator in that particular respect. However, I think in the larger picture is that the people of Scotland will get to realize what a selfish and power-crazy person she is.
Really?
She is just crazy about splitting Scotland. This is a nationalist to the extreme.
No, Callum, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's what the SNP stands for. It's the Scot Nats.
Exactly.
I mean, the raison d'etre of the party is independence. I don't think it's going to come as a major surprise to the people of Scotland that that's what she wants.
Well, she doesn't want... I think she should want the good for the people of Scotland in the first place, not that she should grab power, she and her people. Look at what happened in Eastern Europe. Yugoslavia used to be a very powerful country. Now it's what? A small constellation of little bits and pieces that for many years even were at each other's throat, killing each other and creating one of the greatest tragedies in Europe in the last 50 years. Czechoslovakia used to be a powerful country. Now it's the Czech Republic, Slovak Republic. Okay, they're nothing wrong with them, but however, they don't have the same power, the same status in Europe that Czechoslovakia had.
No, but that's democracy, though.
Well, the
people of Yugoslavia didn't. I mean, the Serbs and the Croats didn't want to remain part of the same country. Kosovans, and the same with the Czechs and the Slovaks.
Well, there is something wrong with democracy pushed to the extreme. The joke about the shark and the English gentleman.
Go on.
An English gentleman fell off of a ship in the ocean. He was very brave, very strong, and there was a shark swimming towards it, and the guy said, "Okay, I'm going to defend myself," and
yeah.
And then as the shark was approaching, he took out his knife ready to fight, and then actually realized that a true gentleman never touches a shark with a knife. So he put the knife back in his holder and allowed himself to be eaten. I think this is what
it's the way you tell him, Callum.
I think for too much pedantic. For the sake of pedantry, democracy is a bit pushed to the extreme. Too much democracy. I don't think Brexit should have been decided democratically. I don't think the split of Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia should have been decided democratically.
Well, what you mean is this, and in fact, it's very timely that you cite this. The will of the people is absolutely meaningless in most contexts, apart from the most binary and basic of arithmetical descriptions, and yet it is being used and has been used historically to justify all manner of excesses and Some would argue disasters. Callum, thank you. I'm staying in Scotland until 12, and then we're moving over to the appointment. If you're just joining me, I promise you this is true. It's not April the 1st. George Osborne is the next editor of the London Evening Standard. For those of you outside London, I mean, it's like the Manchester Evening News or the Birmingham Post as it was, you know, the where my dad worked for it, the big regional daily newspaper. It's not anymore. Or the Evening Mail, actually, in Birmingham would be the best example rather than the Post. The Post was a morning paper. So, you know, there's in big cities, there's one newspaper that is, if you like, the House Journal. My friend John Maloney, who's a very gifted comedian, if you ever get the chance to catch him. I don't know, when's the Balham Comedy Festival coming up, John? I know he always does sterling work there, but my friend John Maloney just tweeted me to say that they're going to rename the Evening Standard the Gideon Bible. Pat's in Houghton Regis. Pat, what would you like to say?
Well, James, Nicola Sturgeon calling, you know, the Westminster anti-democratic, in her words.
Yes.
And for her to say that when she tried to put a block on Brexit, she wants to control Brexit. She doesn't recognise that her country has voted to stay within the UK.
Scotland is a country.
Yeah, and it voted to stay under the UK.
Oh, the UK, I beg your pardon. Yes, of course it did.
So how hypocritical is Nicola Sturgeon? She's a disgrace.
Well, hang on.
She should be stripped.
Isn't asking for a referendum, I mean, as we discussed with Callum, he's not impressed by it, but because it's too simplistic. But the most simplistic description imaginable of democracy is a plebiscite, isn't it?
Well, the thing is, you know, it was supposed to, this referendum she had in 2014 was supposed to last for decades.
But no, Brexit changes everything, Pat. I think that's a fair comment.
No, I don't think so at all, because there could be other scenarios could come in that anyone can pick an excuse to have a referendum. Brexit was one excuse. There could be other things that she should.
But you realise the Scottish National Party exists to secure Scottish independence. It's the raison d'etre of the entire movement.
Yeah, it may exist, but
what do you expect them to do if they're not campaigning for Scottish independence and their party exists to campaign for Scottish independence? What do you want them to do? Play hockey?
Well, if they're going for Scottish independence, why don't they listen to their people that give them another mandate? They're not listening.
She's got a mandate. She's the First Minister of Scotland. She leads the party that governs Scotland, and the party exists to secure Scottish independence.
Well, I'm sure if that referendum come about, that I know the Scottish people have got more sense than ruining their own chances of a future by going independent, and that's what will happen. And I believe.
Did you vote Leave, Pat?
I voted Leave, yes.
Okay.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, I'm not. Just because that's how I felt before the referendum. I thought the British people are too clever to vote for something that may profoundly harm their own economic security in coming generations. It turned out I was wrong. I hope maybe you'll be wrong. Maybe you'll be right. 11:59. I hope you're right for the record. I don't want to get divorced from Scotland. Seriously. I don't even want to have an affair with Wales. It's coming up to 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, checking the date again. George Osborne. Okay, appointing him as editor of the London Evening Standard. That might make sense. We'll find out if you can see. I'll tell you who will definitely get on air first. Anybody who thinks it's a great idea. Anyone who welcomes it, okay? Secondly, how can he still be an MP? What's he going to do on Sundays? Be a vicar? Oh, gosh. I am going to have to temporarily review my oft-expressed opinion that all awards in this industry are meaningless baubles handed out by Buggins' turn to whoever hasn't won one for the longest time. Clearly, for the space of the next 12 months, they're profoundly important indicators of precisely who's lighting the right fires. Thank you, Simon. 3 minutes after 12 is the time. Back to George Osborne's new job. George Osborne's new job. I'm waiting for a gag. I genuinely can't believe this. How many years have we spent together now? How many conversations have we had together? If there's any subject at all I know even a tiny little bit about, it's the profession that I work in. I know what makes it tick. I know how things work. I know why people do things historically. But if 2016 and 2017 have taught us anything, it's that all the old certainties are going out the window. Theresa May at the moment making a speech about how she's going to break down the barriers of privilege in Britain in the same hour that George Osborne, the son of a Viscount with no journalistic experience whatsoever, widely regarded to have been less than an unqualified success as Chancellor of the Exchequer, already rewarded with 650 grand a year for a 1 days a week work at a fund manager that is employing one of his key advisors from the Treasury, and with whom he had meetings during his tenureship as Chancellor. And now they're telling us he's going to stay on as an MP for Tatton. while editing a national news... well, it's not national, but it's as near as, damn it. While editing a daily newspaper. Have I gone mad? I can't keep asking you that question, can I? We're going to have to come up with something a little bit more subtle. Jeremy is in Belsize Park. Jeremy, come on, what do you think?
Morning, James. First of all, congratulations. What do I think? I think George and the Standard have played a blinder. I think it's a very clever move for both of them.
Really?
Because it gives him a voice, and I think it's widely known that his political ambitions remain fully intact. This gives him a voice. It sets it up for him to I'm not saying it's as powerful a base as becoming a rebel backbencher, but it enables him, I think, to do the same without being a rebel backbencher, if that makes sense.
Well, it kind of makes sense, but why can't he be a normal rebel backbencher?
Because he's got more ambition than that.
So he doesn't want to be a... Well, hang on a minute. You can end up with the big job, even if you voted against the party whip on more than 400 occasions. Have you not been following events on the other side of the house with your namesake, Jeremy?
He doesn't have... with no relation, James. Well, no. He doesn't have the sort of networking possibilities on the backbench that he had in number 11, and he will have again as a very...
God, you're right, aren't you? No, well, that's why it's good for him. So he can, so he can still... Because do you know what, mate? You've just reminded me of something. I was actually watching the live feed from the house the other day. I can't remember why. And I saw Osborne. And I saw him coming up the middle bit, the aisle of the House of Commons, and there was some MPs having a bit of a chin wag on. You know what they do in between bits. And he looked like a spare part. He looked as if he didn't quite know where he was waiting. He was hovering on the fringes of a conversation, and it stuck in my mind at the time because I thought, he hasn't quite found his new role yet. And I bet a year ago, 6 months ago, but a year ago definitely, there would have been a degree of deference involved in that because they were sort of Conservative MPs, but he's now the most junior it's possible to be on the Conservative benches, and he didn't look like he knew where he fitted in. So you're suggesting this is a way of almost restoring Chancellor-level status on the world stage while not... Wow, yeah. But he might be rubbish.
And who wants to be a rebel in the Tory party at the moment? I mean,
there's no point.
I'm a member and I feel like a rebel. It's a horrible position to be in. He's socially liberal.
Yes.
He's quite a long way away from where Mrs. May is taking the party.
Yes.
He can explore that. He can even win support for that without without the awkwardness of being a backbench rebel.
Yeah, I tell you what, mate, that's a very strong analysis. Well, what's in it for Lebedev?
Well, publicity, authority, and everything that comes to it. As regards his editing abilities, that's probably irrelevant, isn't it? You're a newspaper man, James.
You're a cynical old soul, because, of course, the one section of society we haven't mentioned during your coruscating analysis of this unprecedented appointment, what's in it for the readers, Jeremy?
I think that's irrelevant as well.
I think you're probably right.
Hey, meanwhile, he's a very good speaker, James. I've had the pleasure of working with him.
Oh, have you? What's he worth now?
I'm a very big part. I couldn't possibly.
Oh, come on.
Look it up in the Register of Members' Interest.
Can't you save me the effort? I'm an award-winning broadcaster, don't you know? I don't have to bother looking up stuff anymore.
No, as you're an award-winning broadcaster, you have a vast team to do that.
Not in this gig. It's 12:08. Thank you very much indeed, Jeremy in Wimbledon, who I should add runs one of the country's leading speaking agencies, so he does know of what he speaks, even if he won't cough with the Benjamins. So I need to make this work outside London. I completely appreciate that. Do you know who should be ringing me? People in Tatton. My God, you've been poorly served, haven't you, during the course of my adult life? Neil Hamilton, then you had the wonderful Martin Bell for a while, and then George Osborne. Exciting to have a big, heavy hitter as your local MP, except now he wants to do that while also doing all these other jobs as well. If you're in Tatton or nearby, give us a call, 0345 6060 973. What do you make of it? Just as if we were mates. Just having a chat about it, colleagues. It's not a big sort of radio topic. It's not a big umbrella, pick a side. If we were sitting next to each other on the bus, and I said, have you seen this? Look what George Osborne's going to be doing next. And you'd say to me, oh, crikey, that's a bit strange, but I quite like it. And I'd say, why? And then you'd explain to me, why do you like the idea? Jeremy sees it as a very good move for George Osborne and a very good move for Evgeny Lebedev, the billionaire, the son of a Russian oligarch. And I think that was pretty close to perfect analysis. But what is in it for the readers, especially readers who might feel that policies enacted by George Osborne as Chancellor have impacted upon their lives in London in a negative way? What sort of coverage can they expect of those issues in the London Evening Standard? And although we did conspiracies in the first hour, my own conspiracy theory about what's going on in America, is this even more evidence of a sort of entrenchment? All this very toxic and, in my mind, bogus rhetoric about helping the left behind or listening to the left behind being used as a camouflage to actually put this plutocracy, you'd call it, this incredibly small number of profoundly entitled people whose position, power and wealth seems to be increasing as the wealth and health of the country, the rest of the country, decreases. Steve's in Cheshire. Are you in the right bit of Cheshire, Steve?
I'm in the bit nearest to our friend Osborne.
Okay. What do you make of this?
Well, I'd heard a colleague of mine this morning banging on about the fact that James Pennell from the Labour Party, who was the secretary for, what was it, culture and media or something like that back in 2000. He
was an MP up near you as well. He was in Stalybridge and Hyde, I think.
That's right, another one. Yeah. Well, people have been banging on.
He was only culture secretary for a year. Then he went to work and pensions.
Secretary of State and Pensions. And and the same thing, he gets this marvellous job at the BBC for $295,000 a year.
He'd stopped being an MP, though, hadn't he, when he did that?
Yeah, he quit.
Well, that's not a parallel.
So, no, but they were saying, hey, it's the same thing, but from the left. But when you look at it, Osborne, he failed at the Economist. He failed at the Times. He ended up doing the Peterborough Diary.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But that doesn't make you an editor. For God's sake. How?
I didn't understand why you brought Purnell into it. Have you come here to win an argument with your colleague while your colleague's not here?
Correct.
Because I know what that feels like. My sympathy is with your colleague. I've picked up on a couple of other LBC shows lately, and it turns out that some callers can get the better of me, but only when they ring in to talk about me on other people's programmes. So you're guilty of that. Very cheap trick there, Steve. You're very poor, very poor. But it's not so much whether or not he can edit the paper or not, because it is just. I don't want to sort of make it sound like I'm trivialising the job. In conference, they all come to you. All the experienced, talented journalists on the Evening Standard come to you with what they've got, and all his job is to kind of under advisement. And if he keeps Ian Walker on as head of news, he'll actually be fine. Just to be a little bit too niche and in for the moment, he'll be fine if he keeps Walker on board. But the competence is doable. All he has to do is pick what's going in the paper and take advice on where it goes. How can he be an MP at the same time?
It's astounding. It just denigrates the position. And all this business about equality, fairness, it's just rubbish.
And all this business about sticking up for ordinary people. Guess who was at the big summer party? You can't make this stuff up, can you? Guess who was at the big summer party was he wearing Union Jack shoes while breaking bread with Lebedev? We only ever found out about it because what's the chops? Lily Allen took a sly photo and stuck it on Twitter. Yeah, you got it. Your friend of mine, Nigel Farage Mep. Unbelievable to think. He's breaking bread with this guy while claiming that he sticks up for ordinary people. Rupert Murdoch was sitting at the same table. But hey, down with communists. Sarah's in Wimbledon. Sarah, what's going on?
Yeah, I studied undergraduate journalism. And I also did media and communication for my master's. And we had some incredible people we used to work for that actually warranted to be an editor. Actually, we had one of the girls that I was studying with. She ended up becoming an editor for The Sun. And she felt that everything we learn at university goes out the window because then you have to conform to a whole different lifestyle when you go and work there. But I just feel that he's actually kind of, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he's kind of used his position to actually progress in something.
Oh, I'm
like
sorry.
This.
I'm not going to correct you if you're wrong. I might caution you for stating the bleeding obvious a little bit too boldly. But I mean, the idea that the son of a Viscount who spent his whole life working for the Tory party and has ended up editor of the London Evening Standard has used his position to get ahead. Are you suggesting, Sarah in Wimbledon, that if George Osborne had been born in a Tower Hamlets tower block to a single mother, are you suggesting that he somehow would not have, his talents would not have delivered him to number 11 Downing Street and then...
Because I've come from a journalistic background and I've studied, the media in quite extensive, and like you said, it's the elitists that are getting further, and there's people out there. Because when I did my masters, I studied with some of the most great minds internationally as well. And I used to go, oh my God, we have not got the talent that, like all these other countries.
I hear you. No, I hear you. I'm late for the travel. It's the only reason I'm moving on. I'm going to have a chuckle, though, about the idea that it might be controversial to suggest that his circumstances of birth have contributed to his success. I mean, look, if you're lucky enough to be born into the winning side of life, as it were, things like a public school education or never having to worry about money, up to a point. I mean, we all worry about money in a way, but you know what I mean. That just helps. It doesn't mean you don't deserve success, but it just means you really shouldn't pretend that you would have got the same level of success if you'd been born into much more straitened circumstances. I've talked to you about this a lot in the past because of my own origins, birth, background, and it just seems to me to be the cruelest slur upon ordinary working people, that they enjoy the same opportunities of advancement that the kind of public school educated demagogues who talk a lot about ordinary working people were born with. It's not just a silver spoon. It's 1216. If I were an excitable individual, I'd suggest that even sort of by the standards of post-referendum Britain, the success, the triumph of Donald Trump on the other side of the Atlantic in completely manipulating American voters, the budget proposals yesterday make it absolutely clear that the people, quotes, left behind, end quotes, are going to be left even further behind than ever before. I don't even think that counts as opinion. If you read into that budget, look at the projections, look where money is being taken from and where it's being put. Then you learn that George Osborne has been appointed editor of the Evening Standard by the son of a Russian oligarch who this summer was entertaining Rupert Murdoch at his summer party alongside various other salubrious characters. I know I sometimes sound like I'm sort of stuck in junior common room politics. I'm really not. I'm really not. If you've been kind enough to listen to this programme for a few years, you'll know we used to have fun playing games about sweets and asking questions about what your favourite sandwich filling was. It's just, as the world changes, so we change. And that picture there, Lily's just sent it to me, actually, bless her, where you've got Murdoch and Lebedev there. Murdoch's bid for Sky is back on now, the thing that got kicked into touch when the full extent of the corruption at his company emerged. And Osborne, who, Rupert Murdoch himself has said that when he visited, I know he subsequently denied this, but he wouldn't he? The city editor of the London Evening Standard, believe it or not, said that he'd said to him, whenever I go to Downing Street, they do what I say. No one pays me the slightest attention in Brussels, if you need to know what happened with regard to the Sun's support for Brexit. And now George Osborne is editing the London Evening Standard, a newspaper that will no doubt be covering the Sky takeover in some depth. Will it now continue to cover? Because this is where Lebedev is a very interesting character. Will it now continue to cover the poverty-related issues that it has done such a good job on? I don't know. But for heaven's sake, the question of whether or not you can carry on being an MP. How many times have I said to you recently that we're going back to the 19th century? The 19th century, when you just had an incredibly tiny but incredibly gilded minority at the top, and everybody else either worked for them or died, starved. I know that sounds like an exaggeration, but it isn't. Think about Downton Abbey. Think about any sort of story that contains a debtor's jail or a workhouse. That the Second World War was what gave the working people of Great Britain dignity. There was no way that those heroes who returned and the families of the ones who didn't could continue to be denied the most basic dignities. First and foremost, welfare state, NHS. And how many people now have been so conditioned and crushed by this media that has just made a former Conservative Chancellor editor of the London Evening Standard into thinking that, for example, lefties, socialists, what do you think the National Health Service is, if not the most fundamental evocation of socialist principles that the world has ever seen? And I genuinely think now that they hate it. I used to joke with you about allotments. I used to say they must drive past these allotments near me in Chiswick and think, it's disgusting. Some of the people who are growing potatoes on that patch of prime real estate are really poor. Why the hell are they allowed to grow? If I could build flats here, I'd have 10 million quid in the bank by Tuesday. They look at allotments, they look at graveyards, they look at fire stations. And I pinch myself sometimes. I go, shut up, mate, wind your neck in. Honestly, who do you think you are? Enemy of the people? But you look at me now and tell me that this gilded elite, or whatever you want to call it, is not doubling down on its monopolies, its exclusivities, and its entitlements. And I do increasingly understand why we're letting them get away with it. It's because so many of us are being so successfully encouraged to be furious about all the wrong things, to be furious and terrorised. That's why it's happening. Under our noses. Under our noses. And that, I mean, this will be a point at which some people go, hang on a minute, this is a bit far, this is a bit much. And then we'll have forgotten about it and we'll all move on. What's change really going to look like? How do we call a halt to this? Retrenchment of 19th century inequality. James is in Sidcup. James, sorry, mate, I went off on one there. Are you still awake?
I love it, James. Oh. I was enjoying it. The fact of the matter is, what will change this, James? There's one other point I want to make, but
of course,
if you raise this, what will change this? I'm property finance. Interest rates are going to change people's minds very rapidly, James. If people like George Osborne, previously the Chancellor, cannot keep fake low interest rates forever. They cannot do it without questioning the whole financial system, because capitalism isn't meant to be like this. It's meant to be 3%, 4%, 5% for your money, and people are getting a quarter.
Listen, I know that you're answering a question that I just asked a minute ago, but you didn't ring in to talk about this, did you?
No.
So I hear you, and that's when maybe the tide goes out and we work out who's wearing swimming trunks, and whether or not they'll be able to blame interest rates going up on immigrants and Muslims, only time will tell. But frankly, I wouldn't put it past them. What do you think about this appointment?
Well, with the tide, he's as naked as the day as he was born, George, because when the tide does go out, we're going to see this as the last hurrah of people who are putting two fingers up to us and raiding the banking system, etc., for the last time round. Let's recall he lived through that crisis, and he is benefiting directly from subsidies which are propping up the banks. How on earth they could say they objectively recruited him against the best of the rest is just incredible.
Well, no, they don't do that. You're such a little git, mate. You're going to make me defend George Osborne now, aren't you?
Don't you dare.
Well, I have to now, because he's not. You don't hire someone in that position after running the rule over 300 or 400 people. You run the rule over all the other former chancellors. That's the level of access and insight that you're paying for. It's not fair to say that you and me could have done that job, although I reckon I could edit the Standard. I reckon you probably could too.
Absolutely. The arrogance of the man in post and his attitude to the so-called ordinary poor people was really 19th century, James.
Do you think so?
This is his arrogance to say, I can do what I like. And it is incredible that the banks are paying for him to represent them in Parliament. If that isn't the utmost corruption based on what has gone on and what is still going on. Remember, we still have $1.5 trillion propping up banks that was printed out of...
Yeah, you're doing that thing. This is advice for all callers. Don't smuggle your hobby horses into conversations, because this is your hobby horse, and my hobby horse is media, so I'm not letting your hobby horse overtake my hobby horse between now and 1 o'clock.
Well, I mean...
Stop flogging your hobby horse, James.
Honesty and dishonesty, James.
Now he's done it. That's strong. Yeah.
Okay. This is what we're talking about, and this is actually, I'll give you my last final picture, you'll like this.
Go on then.
You're watching the telly and you've got your handheld, yeah?
What, the remote control?
Yeah.
Well, when you said handheld, I had an image of Theresa May and Donald Trump, but let's get rid of that straight away.
Right, please, yeah. Or your phone, and somebody lets themselves in and they steal one of your prized possessions off the mantelpiece. You're sort of half asleep, yeah?
Yeah.
And the next day you kind of wake up, you don't even really notice. But the problem is, they do it the next night, and the night after that, and for the past 7 years.
And then you notice when there's nothing left. So your mantle, I prefer boiling a frog, James, if you don't mind.
Well, serial robbery would...
No, it's boiling a frog. You don't. They do it so incrementally. They turn it up so slowly that you don't notice that you're boiling until you're dead, and then you don't notice because you're dead, and you're also a frog.
I don't like frogs, but I don't like cruelty to animals.
Well, okay. I don't like burglars, but you're allowed to use that in your analogy. God, dear, honestly. It's Liberal Elite. It's coming out to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This is fascinating, and Jeremy's wonderful analysis notwithstanding, it's quite worrying, isn't it? More on George Osborne's appointment. I tell you how mad things have gone. When I tell you that David Yelland, who's a former editor of The Sun, has tweeted that if Boris Johnson can run London and the Foreign Office, then why can't George Osborne edit the Evening Standard? And I have no idea what he means. I don't know whether that's a joke or whether it's actually a perfectly valid suggestion that you should be free to edit a daily newspaper and also represent the constituents of Tatton in Cheshire. That's a mark of how baffling the world is becoming, that somebody like that, former editor of The Sun, didn't cover himself in glory in that role, but I don't know whether there's some joke there that I don't get, or whether it is some sort of oblique endorsement of the appointment. But anyway, we'll get back to that imminently. If you were listening on Wednesday, you'll have heard us talk a little bit about Spice, the unfortunately named former legal high, which has swept through prisons and done the sort of damage that regular and well-established prison guards told us, and former prisoners told us, they had never seen the like of before. You'll also remember that I talked about the zombies that we see now on the streets of our major cities, people who have... Well, the example I used was the fella I saw about 2 weeks ago who'd soiled himself in the worst way imaginable, but continued oblivious to sort of snore away in a doorway. Vincent McAviney, our senior reporter here at LBC, was listening, and he's been digging a little deeper into the world of Spice. You might have heard some of this on Breakfast earlier today when he spoke to users, but we'll hear from him personally directly in a moment. But first, he's also been at a homeless shelter in Pimlico to find out just a little bit more.
I've come to Hopkinson House. It's a homeless shelter for people in Pimlico, and I'm going to talk to Wayne. He's been a Class A drug user for a number of years, but he hadn't felt anything like Spice before.
I first started using Spice when I became homeless. I was a heroin and crack user, and I got myself onto a methadone script. So instead of using Cat A's, I started smoking Spice because it was legal, and because it was legal, I didn't realise how addictive or anything it would be.
Can you tell us, for people that haven't used it, what does it feel like to smoke Spice?
It feels as though your whole body is very light, and feels as though you've got hive of bees inside your ears. There's a complete buzz. Feel as though you escape from reality. You constantly want to keep on feeling like that.
James Tomset has worked in this area for about 15 years, and he's told me they just weren't prepared for Spice. Tell me about your experience here of dealing with people like Wayne who have taken Spice. What happens?
So we see a range of effects from people who've used Spice, from extreme paranoia to aggression, all the way up to people that have full-blown psychotic episodes, start fires, self-harm. I mean, just yesterday we had a scene in this building that looked like something from The Exorcist. Somebody who rarely used Spice used it because they couldn't get hold of their normal drug of choice, and it took pretty much the whole staff team staying with her throughout the episode, waiting for the ambulance to arrive. The effects that both the high have and the come down I've never seen anything like it. I think part of that's because it caught us so unawares. We assumed it was it's described as a synthetic cannabinoid, which is a very misleading title. It's nothing like cannabis.
Outside nearby on the street, I found two guys who were smoking something.
It tastes horrible, and just you think different, that's it.
Can I ask you, have you smoked spice before?
A couple of times, yeah. There's a couple of puffs and drop in the floor.
And how cheap was it to buy it?
Spice is in the Camden Town, every corner sale of this.
Well, just a special thanks to Chris, a green badge taxi driver, who's taken this opportunity to send me a photograph of someone soiling themselves that he took from the front of his cab a couple of nights ago. I don't need any more of those, just for the record. Vincent McAviney is with me. You're a youngish man, Vincent. How shocked were you by what you found?
I was pretty shocked. And I think if you've lived in London for a time, you might have noticed there are more homeless people around, and they are in a more distressed state than I think we've seen them for a long time. And, all I had to do was walk out of this office. We are in Leicester Square, it's the heart of London, and walk around a little bit here. And I started chatting to dozens of homeless people this week, and they have all told me how horrible spice is. People like Wayne there, have told me that they found it worse than Class A drugs, things like heroin and crack cocaine. And I've been out with the Met, I've talked to them, they've showed me a spot not 50 metres away from one of their stations where one spice user allegedly murdered another spice user. There's another spot on the Strand where someone smoked one joint of it who had been a heroin addict, and he died at 4 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon with shoppers milling around him. This is a really extreme drug, and when all these legal high shops closed last year, basically the streets were flooded with all of their supplies. So there is this huge reservoir, and they keep changing the formula slightly as well, which means that toxicologists find it hard to pick up in the bodies of homeless people. So we don't know the real death toll, but it's thought to be significant. And I went out with the Met, and what really shocked me was they took me to a spot opposite Charing Cross Station. It's a little tunnel, and the floor is littered with the wrappers of spice, but there are also numbers on the wall.
I know exactly where you mean, because I walk past it every day, and it's frightening.
And there's a queue there.
Yes,
and
it's Dickensian.
Yeah, and do you know why there's a queue there?
Is it a dealer?
There is a number on the phone, on the wall there. If you phone that number, within minutes, someone will be dispatched. A mule will be dispatched on a Boris bike to deliver your spice straight to you. It's basically like Deliveroo for drugs. And I spoke to a guy last night. Now, his name is Steve. He's an addict, and he's still sadly addicted to spice. He's come off heroin before, he's come off crack before, but he says he can't get off this because the withdrawal is so bad, and there is no one that can treat him for it. What's your name?
Steve.
How long have you been on the streets for, Steve?
4 years.
You've got a cigarette in your hand. What's that got in it?
Spice.
How much spice is in it?
It's loaded, it's quite a bit in it, This would probably kill most people, what I've got in there, but I've got quite a tolerance to it, so.
And have you done any other sort of serious drugs before, or was spice the hardest thing you've done?
Crack and heroin, but the rattle from spice is the worst I've ever done.
So you taking crack and heroin and spice, you're saying it's still the worst thing you've done?
Rattle-wise, withdrawn from it, definitely, 100%, without a shadow of a doubt. I'm 38 years old and I've done a lot of drugs and a lot of rattles, and none of that just about killed me, literally.
You think that it will kill you?
Well, it almost did. I was picking up pure blood just last year, I got rushed to hospital and I was there for days, and that's when I cut down to the level that I'm at now.
There's a place near here, isn't there? There's some numbers on the wall, and if you phone it, someone will turn up on a bike and bring you spice.
Yeah, correct. I'll just walk down the street and it's there.
So you've got a supply on you tonight. Are you going to be buying any more tonight, or are you sorted now?
No more tonight, that's enough for tonight.
But tomorrow you'll get up and you'll go and get some more?
Without a question, first thing I'll do.
And do you know anywhere that you could go to get off spice? Is there any way to get off it?
Well, they don't know anything about it, do they? So they don't know enough about it to treat the withdrawal for it, so.
I was meant to meet Steve this morning when he was going to go pick up a supply. He didn't come, but I saw a steady stream of homeless people. He was smoking it whilst we were doing that interview. It smelled horrible, and the effect on him was devastating.
What does it smell like?
It smells a bit like a chocolatey tobacco.
Okay.
That's what it's like.
Therefore spice, so it smells spicy.
It smells slightly spicy. Yeah. And if you see in London, a lot of homeless people at the moment wandering around, and they'll be picking up the ends of cigarettes, and then they'll start scooping out the tobacco, and then they're filling spice with those kind of used cigarettes, and that's how they're tending to smoke it. But I spoke to the leader of Westminster Council, Nikki Aiken, and she said at the moment, because of this specific crime, and I wasn't sure if she was just saying saying this, but she said you cannot give money to homeless people at the moment because of the economics. This drug is so cheap. But everyone I spoke to, all the charities, even homeless people themselves who've come off it, said don't give them money at the moment because this drug is so bad. There is an app called Street Link that you can download, and in places like Westminster and a lot of London boroughs, they've actually got enough beds for the night for a lot of homeless people, and you can use an app like Street Link to alert services nearby to where someone is sleeping, and they'll come and help them out. You can buy them a coffee, buy them a tea, but at the moment, because it's so cheap, I mean, you can pick up this stuff for just, a couple of quid, and it is a lot stronger than people think it is, and there seems to be a real difficulty in coming off it.
And yet, I've had that conversation with that leader of Westminster Council in that very chair that you're sitting in now, and yet, if you were living in those sort of circumstances, the appeal of oblivion presumably increases every day, but that is the attitude of all the experts. Great work. Thank you very much, Vincent. It was great stuff. And we were going to have a phone-in on that question of donating money or not donating money, but obviously we've been rather overtaken by events, and therefore between now and 1 o'clock I'll invite some more input on the question of George Osborne. Let me just point something out to you as a journalist, all right? 2 things. The first is, journalism involves you being told something that somebody doesn't want you to know. That's journalism, right? Everything else is PR. Second thing is, I mean, look, you know that some of the politicians that I have made a point of criticising, not even criticising, some of the politicians who have told lies that I have made a point of highlighting have ended up coming through the door at LBC, which is fine, actually, in many ways. Imagine if they came in as the boss. Imagine if you were living in a democracy where the only chance you've got of finding out if the politicians are up to something dodgy is journalists. And those journalists are increasingly learning that they run a very, very real risk of seeing the politicians that they've just outed as dishonest or as incompetent or as deceitful turning up 2 years later in the boss's office. That's what the appointment of George Osborne as the editor of the Evening Standard represents. Would you, honestly, run the risk, if you've got bills to pay, kids to feed, responsibilities, families to support, would you really run the risk of having the Chancellor of the Exchange? What if Philip Hammond took over at LBC? Even the possibility of Philip Hammond taking over at LBC, he never will, of course, but then again, I'd have said the same if you'd suggested George Osborne might edit the Standard one day. What sort of journalism can we do about Philip Hammond or Gordon Brown when he was Chancellor? If we had in the back of our mind, well, he might be my boss one day. That is the revolving door of the establishment. And who is going through it faster than anybody else? In my humble opinion, all of the people who told you that these big votes of the last 2 years were all about sticking it to the establishment. The establishment still haven't stopped laughing. It's 12:46. David, it took me a while to understand this, of course. Firefighters were the scum of the earth when we had second jobs, he writes. Yeah, of course, he's referring to George Osborne's appointment as editor of the London Evening Standard, his second full-time job. Because being an MP isn't a full-time job, and nor apparently is editing a daily newspaper. And then, of course, will he still have time to do his 1 day a week at BlackRock, or 1 day a month at BlackRock for 650 grand a year? Yeah, Jeremy Corbyn, in the spirit of stopped clocks being right twice a day, has issued a statement that says George Osborne's appointment as editor... Good grief, I just used that phrase myself. George Osborne's appointment as editor of the Evening Standard is yet another example of the establishment revolving door, a closely knit clique who are holding back the British people. The appointment makes a mockery of the independence of the media. It takes multitasking to a new level and is an insult to the electors he is supposed to serve. We are looking forward to an early by-election so the people of Tatton are properly served in Parliament. I just pointed out to you, whatever your politics may be, the very simple observation is that journalists, look, if you're a chomping right-winger and your favourite journalist is, Melanie Phillips or someone like that, imagine how blunted her blade would be if there was a very real opportunity of a politician she used to slag off becoming her boss. It's incredible. Sometimes they end up working at the Beeb, but that's actually different because the BBC is impartial. You walk through the door of the BBC, you have to leave all your opinions at the door. And also the sort of employment practices and contracts, very different to what is now commonplace in the newspaper industry. So like Richard Littlejohn. Imagine if Richard Littlejohn was writing his columns, he'd be all right because he's financially secure. But if he was writing his columns now and Gordon Brown was appointed the new editor of the Daily Mail, it's not going to be in the back of your mind constantly. I'm not going to stop criticising everybody from Jeremy Corbyn to Theresa May and everybody in between because there's a chance that they'll end up editors of LBC. But it's happened. And George Osborne was also responsible for Andy Coulson getting the job as head of communications at number 10 Downing Street. Why? Well, because he had the ear of Rupert Murdoch. And you think I'm mad when I say they're pointing you off in the wrong direction. They're pointing you, you're getting cross with the wrong people. They are laughing their heads off while we obsess about immigration and Muslims, and they just double down on the divisions and the inequalities that are rampant in the second decade of the 21st century in a scale that we haven't seen since the Second World War. And look at America. Look at America. Donald Trump and Rupert Murdoch? Yeah? Penny dropping yet? Budget proposals issued yesterday taking money from just about every single sector of social care, i.e. the areas where money makes its way from government to people who need it. All shut, all going, all gone, all being reduced. What's gone up by loads? Weapons, military expenditure. Who makes money out of military expenditure? Yeah. 12:53 is the time. David is in Burnley. Back to Osborne. David, what do you think?
I suppose, just in my opinion, maybe a naive one, but I suppose to me an MP's sole responsibility should be his constituents and keeping in touch with all aspects of his parliamentary duties, and just, for him, if nothing else, to get this job surely is counterproductive, or I suppose the very opposite, very productive for himself.
It seems I'm not as scorched earth as you on MPs working. Some of them still work as barristers. Some of them, we've had MPs on the. I mean, I wouldn't do a daily show if I was a politician and I gave even a vague hoot about my constituents. But I might do a weekend show or something like that. But the idea that you can, I mean, that's the point, isn't it? If he's got constituency business, if he's got to look after a constituent's interests. He's generally got the mornings to do that at the moment because Parliament kicks off at lunchtime, usually, most days. So he'll edit the paper in the mornings and then go to Parliament in the afternoons. When's he going to represent the poor woman who's just had a boiler towed away because the council have made a mistake or something like that? I don't quite see how this is even been allowed to happen.
Well, I just can't either. It's quite unbelievable, isn't it? 1, 2, 3 jobs. One's with ties with, obviously, big, not corporations, but the banks, as you've been saying.
Yeah.
And it just, again, reiterates the gulf, I think, between the majority of the working class people in this country and then the people who are voting to represent us, who just don't seem to be in touch with that at all. It's just unbelievable, really. And I just can't see how it can have the public's interest at heart, which, as an MP, is his... Well, that's his duty, isn't it?
You would have thought so.
First and foremost duty.
Yeah, you would have thought so, and yet, clearly that's not the case. That was the point Roy Greenslade made that I thought was very strong. That it's that whole perception of politicians. Do you know? Yesterday I was arguing, and I failed. I got beaten on this. Arguing that politicians, MPs, should be allowed to employ their spouses and be allowed to employ their partners and family members because the nature of that job and that relationship is so special and unique. But I got my pants pulled down and admitted I was wrong at the end of that. But you then, part of the reason I argued that was because I thought it's time to rehabilitate politics. It's going to continue to attract mediocre individuals, mediocre, self-serving, vainglorious individuals, unless we can actually put some respect back into it. And then this happened the next day. I also spent 2 hours yesterday praising the Daily Mail's coverage of the Marine A thing. I even went viral with a little clip saying this is the fourth estate at its finest. And how do they reward me? A hatchet job on page 47. David is in Leighton. David, back to George Osborne. What would you like to say?
Right, George Osborne's got to make a choice. He can't be both an MP and edit the Evening Standard.
Why not?
Being an MP is meant to be a full-time job.
Well, it's not, you know.
Well, it's meant to be.
It isn't. Lots of them are lawyers. Lots of them have little sidelines.
But they're supposed to... What annoys me is when you watch the Parliament shows and on the television, and they're sitting there and some of them walk out in the middle of debates. They are employed to sit there and debate and then go back to their constituents and deal with their constituents' problems. What is he doing for the people of Tatton? How do the people of Tatton feel that their MP is now part-time at the Evening Standard and only a part-time MP? It's not fair. He's on his constituents. He's got to make his mind up. He chooses one, not both. Otherwise, he's not being a proper MP.
I love you. You're still furious, aren't you?
I'm still very annoyed. I just think that he can't be a proper MP. And
mate, the reason I mentioned that you're still furious and that I love it is that, do you not think that there is... There's a sense that whoever they are, the elites, whatever you want to call them, they're just banking on us getting fury fatigue now. You can't carry on being this furious and this fearful of Donald Trump. Eventually you're just going to have to talk about something else. You can see it on social media, actually. Stop talking about it. It'd be like saying, stop talking about Adolf Hitler shortly after he invaded Poland. Do you not think this is fury fatigue? This is because you're still furious, but we're going to be... Also, the poorer we get, the less energy and time we've got to be angry. So why not just give the job to George Osborne? The plebs aren't going to have the energy to get angry about it, and the ones that have got the energy haven't got the money to be heard.
No, I think that he really wants to be the editor of the Evening Standard, so let him be the editor of the Evening Standard. Look at the guy, Tristram Hunt. He gave up being a Labour MP to be head of the Victoria and Albert Museum. He gave up his job as an MP. That's the right thing to do. If you've got something more passionate than being an MP, then you have to make that choice. And George Osborne has to make that choice. He seems to be more passionate about being an editor, so become an editor and give up being an MP. That's what he needs to do.
I have to tell you, David, that Sheila Fogarty and I just exchanged a very profound nod with each other as you were speaking. That's the highest praise you'll get on this radio station.
Yeah.
Mind how you go. Well, he was not exactly overcome with exuberance. Yeah. It's coming up to 12:59, and I mentioned that because I saw Sheila's tweet. Brilliant broadcast editors overlooked for top radio jobs. That's been filled by the former editor of the Evening Standard, and then replaced by a sitting MP. That's George Osborne moving into the London Evening. We're in the wrong game, Sheila.
It's odd, isn't it? Odd recruitment practice.
Very
for
odd
sure.
Indeed, very odd. But be careful what you say about Philip Hammond during the course of your programme, because he might end up being managing editor by the end of next week.
It's all right. I'm talking about Theresa May.
One never knows. That's it from me for another week. Many thanks for all your kind words about that little nugget of information that Simon shared with you in the 12:30 news. Yeah, cheers. You're very sweet sometimes. You really are.